Welcome to this week's episode of the Road Racing 360 show presented by 1833 CJ Knows. If you have been involved in an accident or wrongfully injured, call 1833 CJ Knows Accident and Injury Law. They ride, they race, and they know the law. Please give them a call if you have a situation where they can help. 1833 CJ Knows. Now this week, we are covering some of the news from another MotoGP race weekend. MotoGP was back at Qatar for round 2 in a little double-header action to kick off the season. Now after we saw Maverick Vinales put together quite the race in the first round, it was time for another Yamaha to shine. I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen the race, go find the highlights on YouTube, go watch it on MotoGP's Video Pass, something, because this was probably one of the better races that I've ever seen in MotoGP, and not so much for the close last lap battle. That wasn't really that prominent. More so for the fact of it looked more like a Moto3 race than a MotoGP race. The fact that the top 15 was covered by 9 seconds is ridiculous, and at a time where, we are still lacking Marc Marquez and Valentino Rossi was at the back, it's great to still see MotoGP's golden era, taking off and continuing on an upward trajectory. So to kick off, a little recap of the race. We got to start with another incredible rocket ship start. This time it was by Miguel Oliveira, who, again, like Jorge Martin last week, he went from a few rows back and passed nearly everybody, ends up in the top 5 come turn 1. Unfortunately, he'd kind of throw out the anchor, and the KTM, who has been sort of struggling at this track, ended up going backwards, but the fact that he's able to get there in the first place was incredible. Now, for the majority of this race, we saw the rookie, Jorge Martin, who put together a stunning pole position in his second ever MotoGP race, sort of take hold of this race and lead it from almost start to finish. It wasn't until later in the race where he would end up losing the lead and dropping back. But extremely impressive. The fact that he was able to take his Pramac Ducati and put it on pole position, and like I said, just getting used to this, especially in a season where we haven't had much preseason testing outside of the Qatar test, was just incredible. I was also happy personally because Jorge Martin is my pick for Rookie of the Year, and one of the reasons was because he's on such a good team and obviously very talented. But of course, that Pramac team seems like they have got it dialed, because so far they have outperformed the factory Ducati team and have been actually performing incredibly well, taking the points lead into the third round in Portugal. But back to the race, the Ducatis looked great. Jorge Martin was a standout. Zarco was riding well. Both those guys sort of put themselves at the front and were able to take off. Meanwhile, the sort of everybody from 3rd all the way back to like 10th or 11th was shuffling around quite a bit through the race, and you'd see a lot of passes happen. We actually saw the Yamahas drop back to 10th and 11th for a good part of the beginning of the race, and a little bit of worry kicked in, especially because they don't have that top speed that the bikes like the Ducati have. So we were wondering how they would fare. But as the race continued, those guys were able to creep their way forwards. A couple other guys were starting to fall back. But we saw that the bikes, like the Yamaha and the Suzuki, that tend to handle better, were able to take advantage of the tighter parts of Qatar that are filled with more corners and much less of the long straightaways that we see come towards start-finish. Yamahas were able to cut their way through the field. Maverick Vinales was able to get up there and dice, but it was Fabio Quartararo this race who was able to put himself in P1. There I was questioning how he'd be able to hold on to the lead considering the top speed disadvantage that they had over the Ducatis, but he was able to make that up by putting in a blistering time through the twistier sectors of the track, able to give himself enough of an advantage that Jorge Martin and Johan Zarco weren't able to use that Ducati power to get back by. So this allowed him to sort of, once he got in the lead, he really didn't relinquish it and get challenged that much. The other guys stayed relatively close, but not close enough to strike. And that led to Fabio taking his first win of the season, and that means Yamaha has kicked off 2021 with victories for both their factory riders in the first few rounds. Jorge Martin lost second place on the last lap to Johann Zarco. Zarco would finish second, Martin third, and it is now Johann Zarco, the man who we nearly thought was going to be out of MotoGP just a couple of years ago. He is leading the championship. So impressive not only for Johann to be leading the championship after his fall from grace from KTM, but also the fact that he's doing it on a satellite bike. I think he is a little bit of a surprise, but not too much after his first round performance and the fact that we know how well he goes at Qatar and just in general. So overall, a great race. We see Maverick make a couple mistakes of himself running wide and just having some issues. I don't know, maybe pushing too hard. That kind of caused his podium chances to fade, and he was still able to put it back together to where he's going to be second in the championship. During the race, we did see a clash between Jack Miller and Joan Mir. This was a really weird deal where we see Mir sort of run wide, sort of like he did in the last corner in round one, but he's on the rumble strips, and all of a sudden we see Jack Miller kind of come over, and they collide, and they had quite the clash. There was actually a little scary, but nonetheless, both guys were pretty upset after this happened. On Mir's side, he believes that Miller collided with him on purpose and was doing it out of spite. On the other hand, Jack was also upset because he had also been bumped by Mir earlier that lap and run wide, and said he was, Mir's supposed to kind of give up that spot if he's running wide like that. Looking at it from the helicopter view, in my opinion, I really like Jack Miller, but I feel like he maybe saw the red mist and ran a little wider than he really needed to, which caused this collision to happen. I think it really could have been avoided, but considering, like I said, you're in the heat of the moment, your thoughts aren't exactly as clear as they would be if you are hanging around the paddock. So not really a good look, and hopefully they can put this past them and this doesn't lead to animosity at the later rounds. But nonetheless, it was a fire that will probably continue to burn, and a rivalry that will probably continue to grow, given that most likely these guys will encounter each other on the track more throughout the season. In more news involving Jack Miller, it was announced that both himself and Iker Lecuona would be undergoing the arm pump surgery before this next round in Portugal. Now, they won't be 100% due to the fact that the recovery is a little bit longer than the little over a week that we have to go before this race. So we'll be seeing how that makes a difference, and if throughout the season they're able to, keep that consistency without the worry of arm pump going on. Now, if you're asking what the arm pump surgery is, long story short, if you have raced a motorcycle, you've probably experienced arm pump. It is something that gets rid of it. We are actually going to try to do a video explaining what exactly this is and how it works with a real doctor. So stay tuned, because we'll explain what this surgery is and go into a little more detail so you can understand the reasoning and the effects of this surgery. I jump into Moto2. Sam Lowes gets it done again. He put in another incredible ride. He didn't check out quite like he did in the first race where he won by a few seconds, but he did still manage to take P1. Remy Gardner was close, and he has shown some improvement. He was again P2. I think Remy is a rider that is showing that he is a title contender, and he is really close to putting together and getting the first win for this new team. Now remember, he did win pretty convincingly at the last race of the season last year, so he has the speed to do it. He's just got to put it together just a little bit more to get past Sam Lowes, but overall, solid race for him. Rookie and Remy's teammate, Raul Fernandez, wrapped up the podium just a few seconds back. So far, the trend in MotoGP this weekend has been rookies performing and exceeding expectations, and that would carry on to Moto3, as we'll talk about in a minute. It was Marco Bezzecchi and Ai Ogura having really solid races, getting themselves some solid points at the beginning of the season, and two guys that are obviously building up some confidence and going to be aiming for some better finishes throughout the season. Unfortunately for America, if you were watching and cheering on Joe Roberts and Cameron Beaubier, those guys would both suffer crashes that would end their races prematurely, but that's racing. Joe Roberts was having a really solid race, was in 5th place, and just made a little mistake. Ended up on the rumble strips a little bit too long, which caused him to lose control of the bike. had a low side, and that would wrap up the race early for him. Cameron Beaubier, on the other hand, was a little bit further back, but had just set what would end up being the 5th fastest lap of the race and was moving his way forward, battling through a pretty good-sized pack of guys and performing well before, unfortunately, he would have a tip over, causing his race to end early as well. Now to Moto3. Moto3 is not a race that I typically get really into, but this race by the winner has to be one of the most impressive rides that I've ever seen. And it all started in qualifying. Now in Moto3 qualifying, there is the problem that we get many riders who will be sort of cruising around, not at race pace, or up to speed on the racing line, which causes other racers to kind of lose their fast lap. Well, this happened a bunch of times, and a more severe penalty was enforced to those riders to where they had to start from pit lane. We saw a handful of riders have to start from pit lane a few seconds after the main group of guys started, and this would set up one of the best races that the MotoGP paddock has probably ever seen. And it was by the rookie 16-year-old Pedro Acosta, who rides for the Red Bull KTM team. He started on pit lane. By the end of lap 1, he was nearly 9 seconds back from the leader. What he would do is put in some ridiculously fast laps, catch the main group of guys, and again, this was another Moto3 race where we did see a massive group of probably at least 15 guys riding all together, and nobody able to really break away. And what Pedro was able to do was catch up to those guys, pass everybody by the penultimate lap, lead the entire last lap all the way to the checkers, meaning he started the race on pit lane, made up the gap, caught everybody, passed everybody, and won. And considering this is his second Moto3 race ever, is all the more impressive. Now Darryn Binder would come up short, finish second again, on a really close draft attempt to the line. Couldn't quite make it happen. Nicolo Antonelli comes home third, Andrea Migno fourth, and Kaito Toba comes home fifth. I highly suggest you go back and watch the race. Absolutely incredible performance. I'm really excited to see what Pedro Acosta can do the rest of the season, and if he can put together a title charge in his rookie year in Moto3. World Superbike was in the middle of a test as we were shooting last episode, so I want to wrap up what happened in day 2 of the World Superbike test. So at the end, by the time the checkers flew, it was Jonathan Rea continuing his World Superbike dominance. Once again, led day 1, led day 2, and made it happen. 2021 Kawasaki ZX-10RR is looking stronger than ever, still able to put it up there. Scott Redding on the Ducati shows that he is primed and ready for a championship battle. He comes home second, and then American Garrett Gerloff makes it third, only 2/10 back. Jonas Folger on the BMW would be fourth, meaning the top 4, all different manufacturers. And then Michael Ruben Rinaldi, the second factory Ducati, comes home fifth. Tom Sykes on the BMW is sixth. Alex Lowe's, the teammate to Jonathan Rea, was 7th. Andrea Locatelli, the Yamaha rookie in World Superbike, comes home 8th. Chaz Davies, 9th. And then Leon Haslam on the Honda comes home 10th overall on day 2. Now their season won't kick off for another little while, so we've got some time before we see any World Superbike racing. But the way times are looking, it's looking like Jonathan Rea is definitely going to be contending for another World Superbike championship, but we might see maybe a little bit closer battle from guys like Scott Redding, Gerloff, and their teammates. Now to jump to Moto America for this week, we do have one rider announcement, and that is that Andrew Lee is making his return to a full-time Moto America campaign. Now, after only racing a few races last year, Andrew Lee will be racing for the Franklin Armory Disrupt Racing team in the Stock 1000 and Superbike Cup classes on a new Kawasaki ZX-10. Now, that team is also going to be fielding Carl Soltys in the Supersport class. Excited to see what they're able to do with a new team, new bikes, really solid racers. I think it's going to be a pretty promising year for those guys. And with that, that wraps up this week's episode of the Road Racing 360 show presented by 1833 CJ Knows Accident and Injury Law. Thank you guys for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, and keep following us. We're going to continue to be putting out episodes, and as the season gets closer, we're going to get some rider interviews going, as well as some other interesting things happening. Thank you guys again. Y'all have a great week.